Welcome to the Country Watch Political Intelligence Briefing Quick Hits, a weekly briefing of hot stories across the world in brief. I'm Denise Youngblood Coleman, and I'm the Editor-in-Chief and Senior International Affairs Analyst at Country Watch. It's been a year since the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 coronavirus to be a global pandemic. So just as I did last week, this week I'm doing a coronavirus anniversary edition. I'm looking at how a sampling of countries have been handling the pandemic. I want to start with the politics of vaccine supplies and procurement. Ecuador, Peru, Argentina, Jamaica, and Spain were among the countries dealing with what we'll call vaccine queue jumping scandals, as public officials sought to game the system. At the same time, Russia was accusing the United States of America of carrying out a disinformation campaign aimed at discrediting that very Russian-made Sputnik vaccine. In the background of these developments has been the view that drug companies that developed and won authorization for coronavirus vaccines on a rapid timeline, companies like Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and Novavax, are selling most of their first doses to the United States, European countries, and other wealthy nations. This leaves less developed countries at a disadvantage, unable to afford the high price tags to secure early vaccine supplies, and with a great deal of uncertainty about when they will procure vaccines at all. In fact, large swaths of Africa, Asia, and South America may not achieve widespread vaccination coverage until 2023. Meanwhile, thanks to a donation of Indian-manufactured AstraZeneca vaccines, countries of the Caribbean Economic Community, CARICOM, were receiving their vaccines from India. Among these grateful countries were the Bahamas, Barbados, and Trinidad and Tobago. Tiny Trinidad and Tobago, however, was not leaving anything to chance, instituting a sophisticated three-pronged approach to vaccine supplies. In addition to the Indian supply of AstraZeneca, it also secured vaccines from the COVAX facility in cooperation with the World Health Organization. As well, a third prong of the procurement plan was via bilateral discussions with vaccine developers. Chile's effort at vaccine supply procurement is perhaps the most impressive in the world. Going all the way back to late 2019, Chile was working with the Chinese pharmaceutical company Sinovac Biotech, with an agreement already underway to collaborate on vaccine research. And now with COVID-19 on the rise by the start of 2020, Chile wasted no time in convening formal negotiations with vaccine manufacturers. One pathway to getting vaccines into the arms of Chileans included being part of clinical trials with Sinovac, but Chile also diversified its outreach, connecting with another Chinese pharmaceutical entity, CanSino, as well as Janssen and AstraZeneca, ensuring that Chile was part of a clinical trials with each of these entities as well. By March 2021, more than 25% of Chile's population had received at least one shot of a vaccine. Chile has thus distinguished itself as one of the leaders in the world and in the Americas when it comes to vaccinating its population against the coronavirus. But as to the other world leader of vaccinations, that title likely goes to Israel. In March of 2021, more than 5 million Israelis had received the first dose of the coronavirus vaccine, and more than 4 million had received their second dose. The United States is starting to do a better job in this regard. President Biden promised to administer 100 million vaccines by his 100th day in office, and the United States surpassed that goal on March 19th, his 59th day. On average, the United States is administering about 2.5 million doses per day. Another issue I want to cover is the question of why COVID-19 has been harder on the United States, the United Kingdom, and the West than less developed countries. The question as to why this could be the case has bedeviled many analysts, with some suggestions resting on the explanation that less developed countries do not have as rigorous accounts of death and case statistics. As such, they may underreport coronavirus deaths. While certainly plausible, it does not go far enough to explain the difference between deaths in Europe compared to deaths in Africa, or deaths in the United States compared to deaths in India. One reason for the difference is that many countries of the less developed South have implemented more draconian policies as regards lockdown and curfew practices, as well as mask-wearing protocols, as opposed to the more politicized and, let's say, lax approach observed in the United States and to a lesser extent in some European countries. In many Asian countries that have seen viruses before, such as during the time of the 2002 SARS outbreak and the 2006 bird flu panic, mask wearing has become commonplace. place. As such, there's been less resistance to those types of mitigation techniques as compared with the West. Meanwhile, in Africa, several countries like Ghana implemented restrictions in entry at their borders, effectively managing the transmission of COVID-19 from the onset. Another element likely contributing to the differences in cases and deaths is the reality of demography. Less developed countries usually have higher birth rates, higher mortality rates, and shorter life expectancy, which translates into overall younger population bases. In the more westernized countries, by contrast, where birth control is more available, birth rates are significantly lower. Better health infrastructure also means that more developed countries like the United States and the United Kingdom have senior citizens who are able to live longer while simultaneously battling diseases such as obesity, as well as heart disease and diabetes. The comorbidity factor has contributed to worse survival outcomes in wealthier countries. Then there's the fact that less developed countries simply have younger populations, as seen over the course of 2020 in the initial strain of COVID-19, not so much in the variant strains. There's been more resilience when younger people and relatively healthier people are infected. The most obvious explanation, though, is that less developed countries tend to be warmer countries located closer to the equator. COVID thrives more in colder temperatures in the winter. Meanwhile, those warmer environments tend to have more open air structures and thus ventilation. The most crucial aspect of coronavirus mitigation is simply better in those climates. This week, the election in Israel is taking place, and meanwhile, elections in the Netherlands have already taken place. So look out for coverage of those items next week. But before I close, I once again want to share some personal reflections on the global pandemic. A year ago in March 2020, everything changed across the world as we've known it. Changed when the novel coronavirus, COVID-19, was declared to be a worldwide pandemic by the World Health Organization. Despite warnings from public health officials and infectious disease experts that things would get worse before they got better, it is highly unlikely that any of us realized how much worse things would actually become. The number of coronavirus cases in the United States, a developed nation state, has been staggering. The death toll in this, the presumably most powerful nation on earth, even more staggering. As noted by President Joe Biden during his address to the nation on March 11th, the nation has paid a heavy price in blood. COVID-19 has now killed more Americans than World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War combined. The difference in this case, however, was the enemy was a virus. The families ever destroyed by this pestilence aside, the financial crisis produced aside, there were losses of other kinds. A year lost from community, from relationships, from friendships, from gatherings, from the simple joys of touch, of human connection, and the hug of a loved one. As we mark a year of living with the coronavirus pandemic, with all the disruption and yes, the pain that it has caused, this is also a moment for hope and celebration. We have hope for a moment when we can return to the simple pleasures of being together once again. And it is time to celebrate science and technology that has produced the vaccines that will save lives. Country Watch extends its sympathy to all peoples across the world who have lost loved ones to this pandemic. We likewise extend our solidarity to everyone who has struggled to make it through this unprecedented time in human history. As the editor-in-chief of Country Watch, if there's some degree of a guiding ethos, it is my belief that we all live in an interconnected world. This is a lesson that the pandemic has taught us with visceral and intimate truth as regards public health. For more information about these and other stories, read my weekly political intelligence briefing and my coronavirus report, both of which are accessible from the front page of the Country Watch website at www.countrywatch.com. Thank you for your time. Have a great day. And yes, please do remember now more than ever, we live in an interconnected world.